Hello, BookTube. All right, we're back. I think this is part 4. I used to worry about that, but the way I upload videos from the phone now shows me the order in which they occur, so I can number these things, I think, accurately anyway. But I think we're at number 4 for our 12 Nay Q&A. The Q&A celebrating the fact that this channel is not at 12,000 subscribers and never will be. And we are up to Anthony Ruggier. Number 1, have you read anything very good by William F. Albright? I've read a bunch by this author. Probably Mark Richardson has read more. He wrote a book called From Stone Age to Christianity, something like that. I think it was probably his most popular book. I know. I think it was one of the only ones that had like a popular press paperback reprint, and that's where I encountered it. But I think that might be the only one by this author that I've read. Number 2 is, what is the best Aubrey Maturin novel? Oh, I don't think they work that way. It's better. One critic very perceptively pointed out 20 years ago that they really are best seen, as hard as it is to do, as chapters in one huge novel. There really isn't a way. There are books where there's a wonderful character-driven moment. There are books where there's a chilling interpersonal moment. There are books where there's a long and fantastic slam-bang naval action scene. And those don't take place in the same book. No, there's no way to pick just... Well, for me, there's no way to pick just one. Number 3 is, I have read the first Flashman novel and loved it. Do the rest of the series hold up? Oh, yes, they do. Oh, yes, they do. If you have made Flashy's acquaintance and you are happy, then hold on to your wallet and read all the others, because they are delightful. Absolutely delightful. And no books that are anywhere like them could be written today. So you might as well enjoy them, because not only could no books similar to them be written today, but sooner rather than later, before 2025, the publisher of the Flashman novels will have been told, very politely but very firmly, that if you ever reprint these things, we will drag you on social media until your company begs for mercy. And of course, we don't accept pleas for mercy. We'll destroy you, in other words. You must not publish these again, because we don't like them. So I would grab them at your next yard sale where you find them all. Grab them and read them. You're going to love them. And number 4, do you know of a good biography of Mirabeau? Oh my. I read one that I kind of sort of liked a long time ago. I'm terrible with authors' names. You know this already. I think the author's name was Barbara something or other. And I liked it. Sorta, kinda, but I have a strong feeling that this is an example of where, if I went afield, if I looked at the like the used book markets in France, I have a feeling that Mirabeau has been written about fantastically by French authors and who have never been translated. But I don't know that. I have never gone and looked. I've read almost nothing, not a standalone biography. Although I do recommend the section in Will Durant's book. He perceives, his perception of Mirabeau is very good and very well done. It's just not long enough, that's all. Luke and Jennifer Higgins. Hi, Steve. Congratulations on probably 12K. No, it's never going to happen. Question number 1. Do you enjoy the historical fiction of Margaret George? Margaret George has already come up on this Q&A. Yes, I do. I think it's a little bit wordy, a little bit turgid. I don't think there's any reason in the world why there are so many patches of, for instance, the autobiography of Henry VIII that are boring. How on earth can you make that boring? How do you write a fantasy novel about Helen of Troy and make parts of it boring? And the ending of the Mary Queen of Scots book, good Lord, by the time she was finally ready to die, I was ready to push her off a cliff myself. I think they go on a little bit much for my taste, but I like them. Number 2, maybe it's just us, but it seems to us that authors have always seemed to get the short end of the stick regarding biopics. It's not just you. It appears you can't turn around without seeing a trailer for a musician or a musical group, as well as politicians and the occasional sports film. Why do you think that is so? Also, you rarely see authors on talk shows anymore. Well, you don't see authors on talk shows anymore, to address your second question first, because, and I have a hard time, I have to remind bookworms of this, and they don't like it when I do, nobody reads. Okay? Nobody reads. Nobody reads. A couple of you have taken issue with my contention that you could fill one large sports stadium, with all of the serious readers in the world. I firmly believe that that is true. It's easy to trot out numbers, but I firmly believe that that is true. If not one, then 2. You certainly couldn't fill a country with readers, even a small country, even a small state in the Union. Nobody reads. So once upon a time, in the ye olden days, authors would sometimes show up on talk shows. Now, the talk show host has to be in complete control. In other words, an a-hole. They have to be in control of every single detail of what their show does, including booking. And if they are an a-hole and they are in complete control and they have some pretensions that they read, then they'll have authors on. There are a couple of show hosts that do. Stephen Colbert has had authors on. Seth Meyers had authors on. But it's very rare. It used to be that people read. And so, naturally, at the very bottom half of the second half of the show, you might have an author on for a minute. But not anymore. But in answer to your question about biopics, it's because most authors lead very boring lives. Writing is itself a very boring activity. It doesn't change from minute to minute. There's no theatrical element about it. You can do all sorts of quick montages of pens scratching on paper, but it still ends up being boring. So the only way you're going to do an author biopic is if the author's life outside of writing is really interesting. And for every one author where that's true, there'll be 20 or 30 or 100 where it isn't true. So that makes sense to me. I think that is a bit of bankruptcy on the part of the imagination of Hollywood. I think there are ways to get around that, to make even a sedentary only writer's life interesting. And if I had an unlimited budget, say somebody gave me control of a movie studio, I think I could do that. For the most sedentary writer in the world, I think I could do that and make it interesting. But no one's ever going to do that. So I'm never going to be given that chance. And question number 3, Amelia would like to know what you wanted to grow up to be when you were a child. Or did you always have aspirations to be a super hottie reviewer of Midnight Avenger? Oh, hello, Amelia. This is going to seem like a strange answer to you because the thing that I'm talking about doesn't exist in your lifetime. But I feel certain that for a certain demographic, it would have been the universal answer. I dreamt about being something called an astronaut. Because once upon a time, the United States sent men to the moon. They sent men into outer space. They sent men to walk on another planet. And that was, of course, just about the coolest thing you could imagine. When you read the accounts of the men who did that, talking about what it was actually like, nothing would make you want to do it. But we didn't read those accounts. Instead, we saw it as the ultimate adventure, the ultimate exploration. And there were setbacks. I don't know how far along you are in school, but when you are along in school, you will read about some of those setbacks, tragedies that happened, as happens in any exploration. And those tragedies really set back the whole idea of sending humans to another planet, sending humans out into space. So it's not a thing anymore, as the kids say. It doesn't exist anymore as an aspiration. But nevertheless, for me, once upon a time, it was. Ian C. says, "Hi, Steve. No surprise you've reached 12K. Well done." Well, but I haven't, and I'm never going to. I just finished Epitaph, which was so good. Well, that's wonderful to hear. I'm assuming it was my recommendation. I'm now sitting on my bookshelf beside... It's now sitting on my bookshelf beside Lonesome Dove, 2 books you recommended, which are now among my most favorite books. They say good things come in threes, so is there another book or more of this genre which stand in comparison with these 2? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Now, both are Westerns. And Epitaph is about the gunfight at OK Corral, and Lonesome Dove is not. I want to recommend a third book. It's a second novel about the gunfight at OK Corral. It's Bloody Season by Lauren Esselman, who was a bit of a hack. He might still be working. He might still be alive. He writes historical crime novels set in old Chicago or old Milwaukee that are great. He writes a ton of Westerns. And although I think he is overlooked, I think he has more quality than most people think. He outdoes himself in his novel about the gunfight at OK Corral. It is brilliant. Just, you won't put it down. You won't put it down. You'll bring it to the dinner table. And once you find that, I'm pretty sure the Bloody Season is not in print anymore, and I doubt it ever will be. But if you can find a copy of Bloody Season and you read it and you love it, I want you to remember what I'm trusting no Donoghue will forget, which is that those 3 hair standing up, I loved this reading experiences all came from the same person. Okay? They all came from the same person, and it's not that I am BookTube's Gunfight at OK Corral expert, right? I can make recommendations like that for the rest of your life. There is no reason anymore for you to crawl your way on hands and knees through a boring book. There is no reason for you to have any experience other than the one that causes your hair to stand up on end. Those 2 experiences you described came from the one person recommending them. I'm recommending a third book. It will certainly work. And no matter where your interest takes you, I'm right there waiting. Just a thought. That's all. Just a thought. Let's see here. Thanks. I'm already framing my question for 13K. No, we are never getting to 13K. We aren't even getting to 12K. No. We are not getting to 13K. Monkhouse says, number one, what are your thoughts on publishing staff deciding what should and shouldn't be published by their employers? Whether that be something like Woody Allen's biography, Mike Pence's memoirs, or a book by the officer who shot Breonna Taylor. Well, do the staffs decide that? They protest. They quit in protest. They raise all sorts of hashtags. And maybe as the 21st century goes on, they will decide, because mobbing and censorship have become the norm. We have allowed mobbing and censorship to become the norm. Instead of jumping right on Facebook or Twitter, when we see someone trying to do that, it happens all the time. You see it in your feed all the time, and you just thumb right by it. Well, what you should do is, even if you hate the book that person hates, even if you agree that book is hateful, what you should do when you see that is jump into the comments field and say, I strongly advise that you put a loaded gun in the roof of your mouth and pull the trigger five times. You do not get to censor me. You do not get to tell me what to read and what not to read. I agree with you that it's horrible that this person gets a book, and you're 10 times worse. You're 10 times worse. It should be instantaneously defriending. It should be instantaneous. I don't want to hear an excuse. You either apologize and decide and agree never to do this again, or we don't know each other. It should be instantaneous that, and instead we just thumb right by it. Oh, here's someone trying to cancel an author. Oh well. Oh, here's someone trying to get a book published, a published book pulled from the contract. Oh well. The only exception would be if it makes a bad book, if it makes a fraudulent book. And even then, I would still want the book to exist, but I would understand why a publisher would pull it, just because they have their own reputation to look after. Like, for instance, the famous example would be Blake Bailey's biography of Philip Roth. A lot of you have probably seen Hannah at Hannah's Books did a brilliant video about W.W. Norton's decision to pull that book from publication and then to cancel its publication. That book is now out of print. Until Bailey finds a new publisher for it, it's out of print. And that decision has caused discussion all over the spectrum of the book world. And ordinarily I would be against it. But in this case, I was reading that book before the scandal broke, of course. I was commissioned to review it. I was reading that book and I was thinking the whole time, why are you letting Philip Roth get away with so much? When you watch him with this murderously obsessive womanizing and objectifying and manipulating of women, why every time you narrate a situation like this are you making so many excuses for him? Why are you doing that? It's sticking out like a sore thumb. That's not a biographer's job. Why are you doing this? You're describing something that is objectively horrible behavior, and you're saying, well, critics can jump overboard on this, and there was this reason and that reason. I was reading the book thinking the whole time, why are you doing this? And the accusations against Blake Bailey offer an explanation for why he's doing it. It might not be the explanation, but nevertheless, there's no way that you can look at the accusations that have been raised against him and not think they informed how he wrote his book, making it a fraudulent book for personal reasons on the part of the author. I love these discussions. They bring out the best. I don't know of a video on the subject better than Hannah's. In these Q&As, I'm bringing up lots and lots of BookTube videos and old reviews of mine and whatnot. I'm saying I will try to remember to leave links, but I don't know. I don't know if I will. I'll hope for the best. But if I don't leave a link, you can easily find these things. You can easily go to Hannah's channel. You should subscribe to it anyway. She has a video on Blake Bailey and Philip Roth. And whether you end up agreeing with her or not, it's quite the way to talk about this. So, but one way or another, to answer your question, I don't like it. Generally, I don't like it. I understand the rationale for it because the newly published book is you're facilitating the flow of money directly to someone you think is obnoxious or horrible and shouldn't benefit financially from what they did. I understand that argument completely. It's a thorny question as far as I'm concerned. Number two is completely unrelated. What are your thoughts on Ed McBain and the 87th Precinct novels? I'm reading him for the first time, Ghosts, and enjoying the procedural aspects. He's just about the best there is at police procedural novels. The 87th Precinct are really, really good stuff. You have to sort of be in the mood for it. And nowadays, in the 21st century, it would be what is called propaganda. In the 21st century, no, you can't. Because the bedrock assumption of Ed McBain is that although there are plenty of bad apples and plenty of jerks and plenty of three-dimensional people, his bedrock assumption is this is a kind of noble profession. I think that's his bedrock assumption, and you can't assume that in the 21st century anymore. So, little bit. I don't think we're ever going to see. In other words, I don't think we're ever going to see the 87 Precinct books get reprinted. But nevertheless, I share your feeling. When I find them out there in the wild, which I don't often. People don't give up Ed McBain often. They know they like him, so they reread him. But when I find them in the wild, I grab them because they're good reading. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're fine. RTLLTR says, number 1, thoughts on e-comic books. You like e-books very much. Curious if you say about e-comics. I feel even more so about e-comics. Because with e-comics, you can pinch them open. You can zoom in, literally zoom in on the artwork. Which for most comic book artists is bad news. That is very bad news. You will see you will start to see the corners they cut. But for the really beautiful artwork, you want to zoom in. Comic book fans have been dreaming about doing that forever. Now there's technology to do that. So if you get, like, for instance, a big full-color 2-page spread of a John Buscema splash page, you can now zoom in on certain details of it and see the amazing work that's there. Or, for instance, a massively crowded cast of thousands George Perez panel that has a huge number of people in it. You can zoom in. I love it. I absolutely love them. And they're not vulnerable to anything. They can't fall apart. They're not in long boxes that weigh 100 pounds apiece and they have to be put somewhere. They're not anything like that. Number 2, I often see a copy of An American Tragedy behind you. In one of my old backgrounds, there was a paperback of Theodore Dreiser's American Tragedy. I really like it. I like Dreiser. I'm sorry that he's sort of fallen out of the popular taste, but I think he's really good. Number 3, thoughts on Alan Moore, in particular his book Jerusalem. My thoughts on Alan Moore in general is that he has no dogs barking in the backyard, no blue M&Ms in his bag, if you know what I mean. He's certifiably crazy, but he's also a genius. I like most of his comic book work, and I didn't like Jerusalem my first time through. I thought, okay, the dottiness has finally taken over the genius part and pushed it out of the boat, because this is just a dotty old man nattering on and half fantasizing about his own autobiography. And then I read it again. It came out in, I admit, it's a superficial reason, but it came out in a beautiful trade paperback in America. Just beautiful. So I read it again. It's a big thing. It was a big commitment. But I sat down and read it again and saw a lot more in it. A lot more. I would like to think that it's not just appearances that caused that. The hardcover of Jerusalem in America was noticeably ugly and poorly made. The paperback was noticeably beautiful and wonderfully made. I'd like to think that had nothing to do with it, but one way or another, I now think Jerusalem is a genuinely formidable book, and look forward to reading it again, to reading it one more time. And you have another question, don't you? Yes. Can you please consider a War and Peace multi-month read-along this year, maybe with Matthew from Mayberry Book Club? I know what I want for a read-along of War and Peace. I very much consider it, but I know what I want. There's a thing that I want on BookTube just in general, and it's hard to do because I rub a lot of people the wrong way, or people think I smell, or people have busy schedules, or whatever it is. I would like a 30 or 35 person read-along. It doesn't have to be War and Peace, although War and Peace lends itself to that. I would like to get a group of people together, massive. Somebody in the group could spring for the professional Zoom package so that you can have 30 people, and just a barrage of videos. I love read-alongs. I love them. I learn so much from them, and I think they're an invaluable way for you as a viewer. You have all these channels. What's the matter, Bean? Oh, what's the matter, Bean? You have all these channels that you watch, all these readers that we are in this community, and we're all different. And we've mastered the knack. It's amazing in this little community, but we have mastered the knack of appreciating all those differences and not being doctrinaire about anything. And as a result, read-alongs of the same book with a group of people are incredible. They're incredible. Incredible learning experience. I would like that, very much so. I would like it to, not just War and Peace, but a whole bunch of things. Can you imagine, for instance, a 30-person read-along. All the booktubers in our little neck of the woods who love nonfiction, a 30-person read-along of Shelby Foote's Civil War trilogy. Can you imagine how good that would be? War and Peace, Tale of Genji, The Lord of the Rings. Again, there's no reason you can't do a read-along of a book that's already had read-alongs. I would love that. Absolutely love it. I don't even know how to organize it. I really don't. Because a lot of people that I'm cut down the middle between. There are a lot of people in this little corner of BookTube who know and like me, and who I know and like. So I know they're not going to have any weird holdover hashtag issues with me. But a lot of those people are really busy and can't do a read-along, a big book read-along. And then the other half of the split is the people who could do a multi-month read-along, but who don't know me, who only know, a hashtag that has amazing staying power. This is why these blue checkmark social vilification programs are so evil, because they have such a long shelf life. There are people out there who look at me, if the YouTube algorithm suggests a video of mine in their feed, they look at the thumbnail and think that guy is pure evil. They don't know anything about me at all. Nothing whatsoever. They never watched a single video. They only know a hashtag campaign. That's all. And I have no idea how many people out there that I would want to contact for such a multi-person read-along actually think that about me. I'm not gonna. It's so awkward. I would love to do it. If the logistics could be put aside for a minute, I would love to do that. Love it. A multi-person read-along of War and Peace. What fun that would be. Or Shelby Foote, or who knows what. It's on my BookTube bucket list. It's a thing I would really like to make happen. For Shelby Foote, or War and Peace, or Anna Karenina, or the Bible. I would love that. We'll just have to see. Maybe someday. Last page says, "Hi, Steve. Number 1. I know you despise John Updike as a novelist, so this might be a rhetorical question, but what are your thoughts on his literary criticism?" No, I like it. I like it very much. I have all of it over in my literary criticism bookshelf, my hugely overcrowded literary criticism bookshelf. He has multiple volumes on his book reviews in the New Yorker, his book reviews for the New York Review of Books, his prefaces that he was commissioned to do, and I like a lot of it. I think it's really good. I've actually grown to like it more over time, whereas I hate his novels more and more as time goes on. Every one that I reread is worse than I remembered it being. So no, it's not a moot question at all. Number 2 is, would you recommend any sort of background knowledge before reading Dos Passos' USA trilogy, or can I just jump into it? No, you can just jump right in. It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Why it is not spoken of in the same breath as Moby Dick, or The Sun Also Rises, or The Great Gatsby. Why it isn't known, just universally regarded as one of the great products of American literature, is utterly beyond me. It can't be the length, because people embrace books that are long. Even Americans embrace books that are long sometimes. I don't know what it is. I'm just amazed. Part of me wants to think that the reason why is Hemingway. Not comparing and contrasting the book to Hemingway's own books, but that Hemingway worked hard to make sure that Dos Passos didn't compete with him, either in life or in the afterlife. Part of me wants to think that, but I don't like giving even Hemingway that much power. One way or another, you don't need to do any reading now. Just dive right in. Dos Passos will take care of you. He will cup you in his hands. So don't worry about it. You're going to jump up here, aren't you, baby? Oh, sweet. Oh. There we go. And number 3, what are some of your favorite short story collections? Oh, my. Oh, my. Okay. Yesterday, I had a bad morning with BookTube. I'm perfectly willing to admit it. Yesterday was a bad BookTube morning. Ordinarily, I read in bed all morning long, and then I eventually come out into the other room, come out to the technology, turn it all on, charge the things that need charging, always be charging, ABC, and then reacquaint myself with BookTube, find out all that's new on BookTube. It's usually the highlight of my morning, aside from you. Aside from you. Aside from you. And yesterday, that was not the case. Yesterday, I hit one BookTube video after another that infuriated me. Just infuriated me. Oh, with a smile on my face, because you're friends of mine. These are friends of mine. They might not like me, but I consider them friends. I like them. But I was looking at one BookTube channel after another where people were saying, I have crappy work habits and I can't change them. Or people were saying, well, I don't know. How do we know that we're not just all fictional creations of Stephen King? And maybe we freeze solid when he gets up to take some Coke or whatever. And one of those videos was a young booktuber who I think just turned 13, who made a video recommending short story collections. And in the short story collections that he mentions, 4 of them were by people who have been in this room and had wine and calzones with me in their late 20s, agonizing over whether or not they would ever amount to anything. 4, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 on his list of short story recommendations. In other words, people who cannot possibly, no dints to them, they cannot possibly have any experience. They cannot possibly have any craft. And yet there they were on his list. The only person on his list, this unnamed young booktuber, the only person on his list who wrote a short story collection that was in any way worth your time, is dead. He died. He's the only dead person on the list. And in response to that list, I made a list of my own. Now, I didn't make the video because that I don't know how that would be received, so I didn't do it. But since you asked the question, I obviously didn't know you were out there. I didn't make you ask this question. I do have some short story recommendations for you, yes. I recommend the short stories of Eudora Welty, John Cheever, Flannery O'Connor, Chester Himes, Isaac Bashevis Singer, Mavis Gallant, Willa Cather, Elizabeth Bowen, Frank O'Connor, Catherine Mansfield, Shirley Hazard, William Trevor, and Catherine Ann Porter. I recommend all of those short story collections for a number of reasons. They brim with craft. None of their authors have ever been over here for wine and calzones to whine about how little talent they have without noticing that I'm not disagreeing with them. And their short stories are not about you personally. They are not about you personally. You personally do not have to appear in a work for it to be good. It does not have to be about you. Representation is one of the worst things to happen to literary appreciation in the last 2,000 years. You do not need to see yourself reflected in what you read. You do not need to see yourself reflected in what you read. You do not need to see yourself reflected in what you read. Anyway, though, weren't we doing a Q&A? Let's move on. Nicholas Jaramillo says, number 1, I bought and read Bates's Keats biography and absolutely loved it. I have some questions. Number 1, are there any poets, just one is fine, who you would consider a direct successor or highly influenced by Keats? It's terrible for me to I'd be guessing. I really wouldn't know. Number 2, is there any poet that tried to finish what Keats attempted to The Fall of Hyperion, a poem with Shakespearean drama, epic scope of Milton, and insight into human mind of words? I don't have any idea. I don't know of any. I don't have any idea. Number 3, would you recommend Bates's biography on Samuel Johnson? Finally, a question I can answer. Yes, it's great. It's fantastic. And number 4, Arden's King Lear or Riverside King Lear? What, you got a plane to catch? You read them both. We're not talking about long books here. Read them both. Why is there an or here? You got a hot date or something? Good Lord. Shakespeare's greatest play, 2 great editions, and you're wondering which one you should read? Read them both. Pete's Pensive says, did you ever meet Eugene Walter? No. Are you a fan of Ruskin's writing? Do you think his popularity during his lifetime was deserved? Yes, absolutely was. Lastly, a potentially heretical question. Have you read all of his works? No. Ordinarily, I would jump all over you for a question like that, but in the case of Ruskin, that is totally warranted. I actually have. All of his works and a gigantic amount of his letters. But I don't recommend that, and it's not necessary to appreciate him. I just like his tonal register very much so. Jordan Parsons says, I'm currently reading and loving Dermot McCullough's Christianity the First 3,000 Years. Yes, indeed. Can you recommend a similar comprehensive history of Islam? Oh my, I would love such a book. I have never read such a book. I would love it. Absolutely love it. An uncharitable part of my mind wants to say the reason I've never read it is because it could only be written by someone who not only was raised in Islam, but was an Islamic scholar. And Islam tends not to like that kind of inquiry. The more conservative branches of thought in Islam, especially Islamic theology, don't like that kind of inquiry. So the exact counterpart of McCullough's book, if it exists for Islam, I would love to know about it. I don't know it. If any of you do, feel free to make suggestions. I would love to read it. Isaiah Armstrong says, a few questions for you. Number one, I know you love Thomas Mann, and after reading Death in Venice, I am thinking I may soon love him as well. So my question is, if his monster 1,500-page Joseph and His Brothers is worth the time put into it. Second time Joseph and His Brothers has come up. It is worth the time. Yes. I will read his more well-known works first, but I was wondering what you thought about the book that Mann himself viewed as his magnum opus. Well, it isn't his magnum opus. He thought it was, because authors always think that their brainy, abstruse, historical, quasi-literary, allegorical work, the one that's been percolating all their lives, they always think that work is their best work. They always do. And they're always wrong. They're always wrong about it. Whether it's George Ed Heyer or John Steinbeck or whatever, they're always wrong when they think it's their best work. I understand why Mann would say that, but Magic Mountain is his magnum opus. But I agree with your plan here as well. If all you're coming off is A Death in Venice, then do other stuff. Read a bunch of short stories. Read Buddenbrooks. Read other stuff, and save Joseph and His Brothers. I wouldn't go straight from the greatest calling card of all time, Death in Venice, to this work. Your plan of action, I think, is a very good one. I think you're going to like Mann. He typically doesn't disappoint. No matter where you come into his body of work from, typically you end up embracing him. So but I would try it that way. Save Joseph and His Brothers. It'll always be there. And then number two, you have praised Thomas Wolfe before. So I was wondering what you thought of his editor, Maxwell Perkins, drastically editing down the length of his long manuscripts before publication. University of South Carolina published the original manuscript of Look Homeward Angel as Oh Lost, concluding that Perkins made a big mistake when he chopped it down to size. He didn't make a big mistake when he chopped it down to size. He made it better. Some editors do that. I'm not sure I understand the rationale behind Oh Lost, and I hated the fact that I suddenly, in my bookstore, had two different editions of this book, and that customers invariably would wonder, which one should I read? And if you are, for every one customer that I caught, or who came to me and said, which of these two should I read, so I could tell them about the story and advise them, that there were 20 who looked at that and thought, okay, they're different titles. The cover of the later one says it's drastically different from the earlier one. The earlier one's one I've heard of. I don't know anything about this. I'm going to go with somebody else. I'm just not going to read any of it. You just know that it did harm to this book. When that's what editors are for, right? That's what they're for. That's what they're there for. I read Oh Lost, and I'm firmly in Maxwell Perkins's corner here. Carolina Sequiera says, what thoughts on the Atreides pug? I don't know how many of you will know what this is. Of course, it brings a smile to my face, but it's an internet thing. What a weird question. I love you people so much. Finlay Miles says, been here since 11K and I feel like a veteran now. Well, considering how incredibly repetitive I am. Yeah, you've pretty much seen it all. What are some essential novellas to read? Well, we just mentioned Death in Venice. That'd be one of them. There are probably others. I could make a video on it. Also, best intro to Roman literature. Should you dive in with Ovid, or is there a better place to start? I would start somewhere else. Yeah, Ovid, he's very readable, he's very approachable, but he is a virtuoso poet writing at the peak of unbelievable powers. And sometimes, even in English, that's going to give an off-putting impression. I would start with other people. Start with Horace if you want to, or Martial if you want to do poetry. Or start with prose works, maybe a good annotated edition of Tacitus or Suetonius, just to get a sense of things better. I don't know that I'd start with Ovid. I don't know that I would. That's a terrible thing to say, because he's one of my favorite authors. Shabuya S says, what do you think of Breach of Peace? This is a novella by a booktuber, and what I will say about Breach of Peace is that the marketing plan that Daniel Green undertook was very canny. It's a very canny marketing campaign. Send out a copy of your slim novella not to critics but to booktubers, and get all of BookTube talking about it. Can't help but have generated sales. Very canny marketing campaign. Joe Buckley says, when a booktuber says, I have read books so-and-so and so-and-so, then describe an audiobook, do you consider that a misrepresentation since they use different senses? I don't know if I'd go so far as misrepresentation, but boy, oh boy, do I notice it too. When I'm listening to a booktuber and they're saying, let's say they're doing a monthly wrap-up and they say, I read 7 books, and most of them were really good. It was a really good reading month. And then later on in the video, they revealed that 4 of those were audiobooks. Maybe it's just an old-fashioned reaction on my part. I don't think that it is, but one way or another, when I hear that, in my mind, I jump back a bit and I start recalibrating how many books they actually read. I don't trust audiobooks to signify as just a one-to-one equivalence with reading a book. I don't trust that equivalence at all. I can't make dinner while I'm reading a book. I can't clean the floor while I'm reading a book. I can't drive to my in-laws and yell at every car on the road while I'm reading a book. I can't do that. Reading a book requires concentration, and it's entirely private, and it's mediated only by me. Only by me. If I think a character in a novel has a droning voice, then they will have a droning voice. If I think a character in a novel has a droning voice in an audiobook, well, I will learn that they don't. That is wrong. That is someone else doing part of your reading for you. Same thing with pacing, same thing with tone. And I agree. I don't know how far I would go in disqualifying it, but I agree with you with your implication here that it immediately stops me when a booktuber says that. It's the old audiobooks as reading question. Much vexed. How are we doing for time? Oh, good Lord, we're way over here. We'll stop now. We'll go on to something else next time.